Maggie Gyllenhaal's new film, The Bride, is a very interesting example of how the Universal monsters have progressed and evolved over the years, and kind of adapted to kind of what we need them to be in the modern day. And let's take a look at where Frankenstein was and where Frankenstein might be in 30 years from now. So like, subscribe, and first, let's take a look at the evolution of Frankenstein. Frankenstein first appeared in Mary Shelley's 1818 novel, Frankenstein or the Modern Prometheus, which is now over 200 years ago, which is pretty insane to think about. So here's some interesting things. So first off, the creature is not given a name in the book. We all collectively know the creature as Frankenstein, but in the book, Victor Frankenstein calls the creature, fiend, demon, and ogre. Frankenstein, the creature Frankenstein, actually also refers to itself as a monster towards the end of the book. This novel spawned many adaptations, plays, unlicensed spin-offs, and amongst that, the most popular of them all, the Universal Studio films. The Universal version of Frankenstein is very different than the book. The creature in the Frankenstein book is very intelligent, almost more like a skeleton rather than like the big beefy creature he is in the movie. In the movie, he's a tall, bolt-necked, flat-headed creature with very, very short hair. Whereas in the book, this is how he's described. His limbs were in proportion, and I had selected his features as beautiful. Beautiful! Great God, his yellow skin scarcely recovered the work of muscles and arteries beneath. His hair was of lustrous black and flowing, his teeth of a pearly whiteness, but these only formed a more horrid contrast with his watery eyes, that seemed almost of the same color as the dun white sockets in which they were set, his shriveled complexion and straight black lips. This is almost nothing like what we see in the book. And what's rather interesting is kind of like depending on who you talk to, they'll see Frankenstein as very different things. Some people will see very specifically the Boris Karloff version of Frankenstein, and others will see how Frankenstein was described in the book. One last way that Frankenstein has kind of evolved from the book to how we kind of culturally understand him now is that in the book he's rather intelligent and capable of understanding a lot. Whereas the understanding in pop culture is that the creature is dumb and kind of very like childlike almost, which is really not how he is. The cutscene in the Frankenstein film, where we see the creature actually interacting with the child and giving her a sunflower, really shows that the creature himself is not inherently evil or crazy. He's simply interacting with the world the way that he knows how to. I think in culture, we probably would see Frankenstein very differently if they had kept that scene in the movie. But they didn't want to because they didn't want people to think that Frankenstein, the creature Frankenstein, was a good person. It was very lacking in nuance back then, which honestly is a huge problem because this character is not a monster. He's just called the creature or Frankenstein's monster because Victor Frankenstein himself is actually the monster. It is not the creature's fault that he is what he is. This brings us to the Frankenstein on Netflix. This version of the film is rather close to the book, and it seems like they really cared about getting a lot of things correct about Frankenstein. His hair, his intelligence, and his ability to kind of understand a lot of things that were going on around him. Same with understanding Victor Frankenstein and how he's actually kind of the villain of the story, and that the creature really didn't do anything wrong by existing and living. The thing about this version of the story is something that I find rather interesting about a lot of different newer versions of Frankenstein. They create and combine a bunch of new versions of Frankenstein and kind of put a bunch of different pop culture mythos into one film in this movie. The creature falls in love with Elizabeth, who Victor is also in love with, and that's because Elizabeth is the only one to truly see the humanity inside the creature. And she almost kind of takes the role of Bride of Frankenstein in the movie. In the book, the Bride of Frankenstein is merely just a concept of a character. Victor begins to create the Bride of Frankenstein for Frankenstein, but then destroys her, thinking that she might become evil or they might create offspring that brings more creatures to life. But that is what is missing from the Netflix film. It makes the film feel off. So yes, Elizabeth is killed in this new film, but it feels very different as Victor shoots at the creature and Elizabeth jumps in front of the bullet to save him. I think if after this moment, Victor did what he did, comes to his senses and tries to reanimate Elizabeth to be the Bride of Frankenstein, the film would work better than if Victor then destroyed the version of the bride that he just created for himself. And then we would understand why Frankenstein chases Victor the way he does into the ice and into the Antarctic. There's an obsession with romance and love in the new Frankenstein movie that the book intentionally doesn't allow. The idea of love and the creature are intentionally kept separate from each other, specifically by Victor, and that's kind of what sets the dark and gothic tone of the book. So why the obsession with love in Frankenstein? I think the 1935 film Bride of Frankenstein has permanently linked Frankenstein and the Bride of Frankenstein together as romantic partners. The biggest change in the Bride of Frankenstein is that she does become reanimated. And then that brings us to the newest version of Frankenstein, Maggie Gyllenhaal's The Bride. Spoilers. This version of the story, Mary Shelley herself wants to tell another story set after the story of Frankenstein, but she couldn't because she died, so she possesses another woman named Ida to help her do that. Again, very different, and it does show that Frankenstein, Victor Frankenstein, and the Bride of Frankenstein have all kind of morphed into one creature. And in a way, very similarly to what Victor Frankenstein does to the creature, we've kind of created and morphed our own version of Frankenstein from these different versions of the story. But this just kind of makes me wonder where the modern horror legends will be in 100 years from now. Leatherface, Freddy Krueger, Michael Myers, Jason Voorhees. Will Jason always be afraid of water because of Freddy versus Jason? Who knows? I think it's rather interesting to see where these kind of villains will be in 40, 50, like 100 years from now. That's it for this one. What do you think about the evolution of Frankenstein? Where do you think the horror villains of today will be in 100 years from now? If you'd like to, you can follow us on Instagram. It's @MediaByteCompany, and TikTok is @MediaByteCo. If you'd like to, you can listen to all the podcasts on the MediaByte Podcast Network, Diary of an Indie Filmmaker, Slash It, and Exploring Cinema. It's available wherever you get your podcasts. If you're interested, Patreon has some really cool content coming your way soon. It also has a bunch of stuff there right now, ad-free podcasts and commentaries. Patreon.com/MediaByte. Thank you all very much, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.